In this video, I'm sharing 7 creative ways to use stencils. This first one is going to share some tips to help you stop struggling whenever you're creating stencils on round glass. Grab one of Dollar Tree's smaller mason jars for this lantern decor piece. We're not going to need the top, so we can go ahead and pop that off. And we're already off to a great start. Use any planter you would like for this part. I happen to have one of these square galvanized pieces, and I'm going to be using that. I grabbed it from Dollar Tree, as well as one of these Dollar Tree candle holders. Now, I've already painted this up and I have a transfer on it. Mind all of it, okay? Because we're not going to see it. We're just using it to be able to set our mason jar lantern on top of as its little stool. Floral foam would do the trick as well. To create the lantern look, we're gonna need one of these LED hanging lamps from Dollar Tree. I love how these fit perfectly right into the top of these mason jars, and they have the little button on the top so they're easy to turn on and off. I want to add a little something onto the mason jar, so I grabbed one of these stencils that I picked up off Amazon. You can get them in a pack. I even think I have some down in my Amazon affiliate link in the description box. I'm trimming it down to the size that I need, and I'm gonna grab some painter's tape and cut a whole bunch of little sections, because as you can imagine, it is not going to stay on here easily. So we're going to need to make sure that we're taping this down as much as possible, because it is a plastic stencil. You can obviously create your own so this way they stick on here, and that would probably work better, but I'm a rebel and we're going to use this plastic one. I know this multi-surface paint sticks amazingly to glass, so I'm just going to go ahead and use that. And I've had a lot of people say that they can't stencil. And a little tip, I do have a how-to stencil video. I can link that down below. A little tip, it doesn't matter what you use to apply your paint. I want you to understand the best way to stencil is to make sure you offload most of your paint to where whatever you're using, whether it's a paintbrush, whether it's a sponge, it is practically dry. If it is almost dry and there is no paint, you're not going to suffer from all that smushing underneath of the stencil, creating a lot of bleed through. Since the jar is circular, I'm also placing my finger very gingerly in different sections that are popping up on the stencil. So this way I make sure that as I'm applying my little pouncer, that the paint is going right over the stencil and not bleeding through. Also, it's a good idea to always remember that you want to keep your glass clean whenever you're working with it. You'll notice here I don't have gloves or anything like that, and I didn't clean my glass, and that's because I'm mostly just keeping the pieces for me and creating them for the ideas for you for the video. You want to make sure if you're doing this at home, you keep your glass clean and you wear gloves so you don't get any of those finger oils onto the glass underneath your paints. A lot of tappity, and later we have a beautiful stencil in our mason jar. I am shoving some greenery in our galvanized bucket piece. Pop whatever you would like in here to finish it up. Also glue whatever you want to glue down. Use your E6000, your Gorilla Glue Gel. I have things just sitting in here for staging purposes for the video to introduce the idea to you at home, and I hope you love it as much as I do. Stencils alone don't just elevate your DIYs, but creating a background will also help them pop. Stain art is very versatile and an amazing way to create unique looks. There are so many different ways you can use this idea, and I'm going to be sharing tips and tricks of the basics. One of my favorite ways to do this is to take a piece of wood and mix multiple colors. This is very beginner basic and really helps you get a feel for how creating your own stain soaks into the wood and how it dries lighter than what it usually looks, as well as getting the hang of blending. One of my favorite ways to end with these pieces is to make it look like it's wood, so I like to stain the wood and blend it in with the colors, and we're going to be doing all of that right now. I want you to keep in mind this technique you can actually use on furniture as well. I have done this on furniture pieces, on tabletops. I've done this on larger wall pieces, and you can put vinyls over them. It's absolutely beautiful depending on the way that you want to create this. Just takes a little bit of patience. We're going to be using these 3 colors today, and they are acrylic. I like using acrylic paints. They're easy to mix with water and give a really cool stain look. I almost never measure. I usually wing, but for the sake of the video today, we are going to measure. So when you do this at home, you have all the tips and tricks that you need to be able to recreate it. We're gonna start off by putting our little squirts in. And I'm probably using about a teaspoon of paint in there. And I'm gonna do that for each one. About a teaspoon. And then this pretty color, about a teaspoon. There we go. I don't have a measuring cup down here in the craft cave, but what I do have is a little bottle of water I keep to refill my little spray bottle. So you'll see that it is right underneath this blue line, and we're not going to use a whole bunch. Probably about a 1/4 cup in each one of these. I'm just going to kind of eyeball that. Use whatever you want to mix it up. I just had a dowel laying around here, and just spend about 30 seconds stirring it up till you don't see any clumpy bits of that acrylic paint laying around. Tools for the trade here are going to be paintbrushes and napkins, okay? Paintbrush to apply the stain and napkin to wipe it back. Good thing to know is that the longer you allow this to sit on here, the darker the color is going to be. But also be mindful, because you will have striations, and we want this to be blended. Because this is the first layer, I'm going to leave it sit on here so you can see exactly what I'm talking about with the striations. This is soaking in, and as it's soaking in, you can see the line where the paint ends. Well, our stain, our DIY stain. And you might ask, Brandy, why aren't we doing this with just a paint? Well, the paint is going to cover over the wood grains. And I don't want to cover over the wood grains. I want to just keep the wood grains, create a stain, and allow beautiful colors to pop through on our wood, giving it an entirely different look. If you leave your paint sit on there too long, this is what's going to happen. When you go to wipe it back, you can see the lines. So you want to keep that in mind. Even if I remove the whole thing, what can you see? The end lines, okay? So that is going to make your stain look wonky. You don't want to do that. What you can do instead is a heavier layer of paint. Like if you want it to get on here, have it heavy. And then pull it. And then do the same thing in the same spot. It's going to take you a couple times, but you're not going to have those harsh lines. Instead, you can see the color starting to come up. So the longer you leave it on here, like if you want to leave it on for a couple seconds, the deeper this color is going to get, which is fine. Leave it on for a couple seconds, pull it back. And each time you do it, leave it on for a couple seconds. The color is going to get deeper. Pull it back. This is preventing those harsh lines, and instead it's creating a blend. So the longer you leave it on, the deeper your color gets. But be mindful leaving it on too long, because you will then get these awkward lines in there that don't actually blend in with the wood grains. If you're just doing one color, obviously this doesn't matter, but I like to live on the edge, and we're going to do several colors, and I'm never really sure how I want this to go until it starts happening. I will also tell you that I think it's a good idea whenever you're doing this to go with the grain of the wood. Just looks natural to me when you're doing stain art like this. The idea is to make it look very natural with your wood piece. do not want to add the Waverly wax, don't. You don't have to. This is just something I like to do. It, to me, gives it just a hint of a, oh my gosh, is that actually wood? Or, you know what I mean? Like, is that made like that? Or was it created like that? And try and be mindful as you're doing it to really rub across so you don't have any harsh spots of just stopping. So if I wouldn't have started rubbing that completely towards the edge, there would have been a little stoppage there instead of some blending. If you want to stop here, by all means, you go right ahead. This is completely dry. It's the next day. I'm not going to stop here. We're going to pop a raised stencil on top of this sucker. There are a bunch of different ways you can create a raised stencil. I used to use joint compound, and I still do on certain pieces depending upon what I'm doing. One of my recent favorite finds is Tim Holtz texture paste. It is non-toxic. It does not have a smell to it. It dries really well. And I do like to seal over my pieces. Once this is completely dry, I'll usually wait a day or two to be able to do that. You want to tape down your stencil so this way it doesn't move, and then get to applying. Next time you're creating some book decor, try using a stencil to overlay some decoupage. People, I love making book decor. It's one of my favorite things to DIY. And I love it so much also because it's inexpensive and you can make 1, 2, 3, 4, as many as you want, and still elevate any look in your home. I was low on chalk paint, but I recommend using chalk paint for this. I mixed some acrylic paint and some chalk paint to get like a off-white, bright white base for our book. And make sure you let it completely dry before you start decoupaging it. We're going to seal up the book first. Now this, you can skip this step if you do not care if your book is sealed. I sell a lot of my book decor and it is just a preference. I'm still tweaking this just a bit, but for right now, my favorite way to do this is to take some tacky glue and some hot glue, and I alternate between pages. And I don't do every page. I do like how you see me literally flipping through, and I do about 3 passes of this until I can turn the book on its side and kind of wiggle it. And for the most part, I see clumped up pages. And again, you can skip this part if you want, but since I do put a lot of things on this book, I don't want to chance it kind of flopping open and then a piece breaking off or something like that. I try to make them as sturdy as possible. To finish it off, I take more of the tacky glue and smear it on the outside pages. And so far, this has been working pretty well. And just a little tip, if you're ever looking for things to decoupage with, I have my own brand decoupage paper as well as sell napkin bundles. You can find links underneath my YouTube video by clicking the more button, and then they're going to open up. I have them listed in there for you according to napkin bundle, TDS Decoupage Paper, or the website link itself. And if you decide to click on the website link, it's going to open right up to where all you have to do is scroll, and it's going to show you TDS Decoupage Paper picture or the napkin bundle picture, and you just click on what you're interested in and it'll take you right to the shop. I hope this information was helpful. Now back to the DIY. I'm using the entire napkin mostly to cover the book. And since there isn't enough napkin to go around, we're going to have to kind of tear it right down the middle. So I measured till I was happy about where I want it to place the napkin, and then just ripped it right down the center. We're going to actually use a clay mold for the spine of the book. So we're going to blend that all in, and we're just going to kind of get the sneaky layers off. So we just have our top layer. If you struggle doing this, there are a few different techniques you can use. One is taking some Mod Podge and putting it on 2 fingers to get those extra little sneaky layers off. Or another that I like that's quick and easy, you just see me do, is to rip a part of the napkin, and then you can usually see them. You can just grab them suckers and then throw your extra to the side. And a third, if you're really struggling, is to take 2 pieces of painter's tape, put them on a corner, opposite ends, and then pull them apart, and they'll come off that way too. Most of the time for applying your Mod Podge, I can use any acrylic brush, but I like using on detail projects and things that I'm going to be selling little fan brushes. Because once I get to the ends, the fan brush is so thin, it allows me to go around the edges of the paper or the napkin, should say napkin, my bad, it's a napkin. Allows me to go around the napkin and just get in there. It allows me to smoosh a little bit of the Mod Podge right underneath the napkin and then just kind of paint it down. And for those of you that are like, iron on method is the best, I get that comment so much, where I got that one iron on method warrior that is like, I need to let her know. I am aware. Thank y'all so much. I know the iron on method is the best for making sure there's no wrinkles. I only like using that on wood. I do not like using that on metal. I do not like using that on my books. Does not yield well for me. I prefer this method and taking the sponge and the sponge molds to what I'm doing. To each their own, you know what I mean? Different strokes for different folks, people. I am here entertaining and offering you my non-professional wisdom. On the top cover of this book, I decided I wanted to tear a corner because we're going to be creating a raised brick stencil on this as well. So I wanted to just give it a different level, create a little vintage-ish going on. And here's me doing the little tuck in method. See how I'm using this to just kind of press around the edges to see if anything's loose and smacking on back down to the book. Super quick and easy. Not this quick. I gotta sped up for y'all. Otherwise, it took me 3 days to make this book. In case anybody's wondering, 3 days. 3 days of waiting patiently for all the drying going. It was horrible. Okay, I'm done. Let's move on. Once the first day of the drying rolled around, I went ham on this sucker with sandpaper. I took some water, I went around all the loose bits, I then took an 80 grit and I got everything off. And then I took some more Mod Podge and I sealed everything on down really nice to the book. Now it's time for the fun part, to take some clay and some molds and add some pieces onto our book. We're going to use this Prima mold to add on our spine. This is my favorite clay, the paper clay. I've used a lot of clay. I have carpal tunnel. I talk about this all the time, and it is just easy to mold. So this is why it's my favorite. In addition to, I can sand it lightly and I can put it on furniture. I have not had any issues with this at all. I really like it. It is air dry as well. You do not have to put it in the oven or anything like that. You just gotta wait 24 hours. I know the dry times. I use wood glue for this. If you do not want to use wood glue, I would recommend using Gorilla Glue Gel or E6000 if you like E6000. I try to stay away from that stuff unless I don't have my Gorilla Glue Gel or my wood glue. You could even use Tacky Glue if you wanted. That would probably yield a good bond. Don't be afraid to press this stuff down. Don't get wild with it and try and smush it, you know what I mean? But you can definitely like press it down gently. My mold, you can see, was not long enough to do the whole spine of the book, so I just added an extra little piece and I'm taking a clay tool and just kind of pressing it down so it just meets up. If you don't want to do this part, another thing that I have done is take little stickers to add to the ends, or you could take half of little beads, or you could use a stamp to put little stamps on the bottom. Since I have butterflies in the napkin, I popped out 2 little butterfly pieces to give it a 3D effect on the top of the book. And just in case you're wondering, everything you're seeing me use here with the clay tools, the molds, the clay itself, that is all down in the description box in my Amazon store. When I tell y'all I want you to be able to recreate the things that I make so I can try to make sure you have access to them, I am not kidding. Unless it's my Dixie Belle paint, then I mean that stuff's not easy to come by. And if I do think that I'm using something you guys don't have access to, I always try and offer you other options. For this next part, before we let the book sit and dry another night, we're going to put a raised stencil on here. I'm taking a little bit of spackling and I am smooshing in these 2 acrylic paint colors. If you do not have these fancy schmancy little spreaders, a spoon will work. I picked these up in a pack from Ross If you guys are not following me on browsing channel, I do have a browsing channel where I do a lot of shopping and I show you guys where to pick up things and, you know, budget friendly, inspirational stuff. Have I plugged myself enough in this video? But I picked this up in a pack. It is super cheap. You get paintbrushes, all kinds of stuff. And Ross usually has these for $4.99. The stencil that we're using is like a brick stencil, and this I picked up in a pack off of Amazon. I'm not completely blending both of the paints together. I'm kind of just putting a little bit on one section and a little bit on the other section of the spatula, and then just kind of going over in spaces in the stencil to create an ombre effect. Feel free to skip this part altogether. I just wanted to add something extra, give you guys a little bit extra idea to kind of elevate your book decor if you like making book decor, or if you just want to hang out with me today. How many of y'all are just here hanging out with me? I love y'all, you know I do. Now, the next day, okay, we let this dry 24 hours. We let this dry 24 more hours, okay? And then we're giving it a good test go. I'm pulling, I'm poking, I'm taking my fingernail, I'm digging it into different sections. I want to make sure that this is ready for me to do extras to it and to put a seal over it, so once I go to then sell it, I don't have things falling apart. I like using acrylic paints on the clay for intricate things like this because it absorbs really well. Chalk paint will get clumpy. I don't mind that on my furniture pieces because I can sand, but for something like this, I'm using acrylic paints and just taking colors that make sense for the napkin of the book. And yes, it's sloppy, I know. We're going over this with some dry brushing to kind of blend in all the things so it looks like one cohesive piece. And then I'm going to pop back in with some gilding wax to give those highlights. If you do not have a gilding wax, you can come in with a chalk paint, a darker color, and go over them lightly with a little bit on your finger, and it is going to help the details of your clay piece pop out. But first, you're going to want to take a dry brush like I'm doing here and just lightly go over everything to really blend it together. I am starting with a black. I do come back in off camera with a silver. After it dried, I was like, oh, it needs a little something extra because I just can't leave things alone. For the finishing touch, I just took some burlap and a little bit of nautical rope and tied around. I added a couple little trinkets to it, and the floral is just kind of sitting on the top there for decoration. You can mix colors and mediums to create little scenes using different stencils. This little tag is one of my favorite new finds at Dollar Tree, and I love this Tim Holtz paste. So we're going to create a little raised design on here. And people, in the event you feel like you need fancy tools for stuff like this, you don't. Check this out. I'm just using a little plastic spoon. Now I want to change the color here. So we're going to take some black acrylic paint, give it a little squirt, and then smoosh it around until our paste is the color of the paint. And then grab your stencil, people. Well, I grabbed two. I grabbed some bees and some flowers. They're kind of in this season. Well, they were written last year too, but I thought this stencil was cute and we're just gonna roll on with it. If you're not a bee fan, grab whatever you want, okay? Don't let me, you know, stunt your creativity. And yes, you've seen me trimming the stencil down. You don't have to do this. You can keep yours whole. I just trim mine down. I'll keep them in a little container, rinse them off whenever I need them. You know what I mean? You do you. But cutting them down lets me fit them on this little piece just perfectly, and then I just smooshed in the mixture around. I do recommend taping this down. Don't be a rebel like me and just hold it on there. Messes happen and mistakes are definitely made. I personally just wanted to try it out because this paste is fairly new to me and I love it. So, you know, I need to be able to give you guys my real opinion, and I can't do that if I don't try different things. So I'm taking two different colors, a little peach here and a yellow, and mixing them up to give us the color for our little flower. Even though I didn't put any yellow on our bee, I thought it would be nice to kind of have a little pop of yellow on here outside of the bee. giving a really nice contrast. And then I just took a little gem that was, you know, on one of my little sticker things from Dollar Tree, plopped it in the center here, and I did decide to put a little bit of highlights around the flower using a dotting tool. I just made little dots and made them smaller as we went along, and decided to add in one more little flower up in the corner. This turned out so flippin' cute. Sometimes just a little stencil accent can really help out a thrifted piece you're repurposing a whole lot. This is actually the top of an old child's dresser that I flipped a while back. It was holding a mirror. It is in bad shape. I'm gonna fix it. And we're gonna turn it into a shelf by using this 1x8. I started out just by placing this on top of the board, and I'm gonna give it about an extra 3 inches on each side. Not getting too wild, just extra 3 inches. And I've had a lot of questions about the miter saw that I use in my inbox, emails. I use this one that slides out at 7 inches, people. It runs about $189 on sale at Home Depot, and I love it because I can, you know, move it around and make it do what I want it to do. So if you're watching and you're one of those and you're wondering, and I've even showed it in some of my browsing videos when I go to Home Depot because I get a lot of questions about what I use. So I hope that helps. Before I attach this onto our shelf, I gotta wood glue it up and I gotta tighten things up because it is just wonky and unstable, and I'm just going ham with the wood glue. Then I clamped this on down and I left it to dry for 24 hours. There was a hole in here and I thought, let's put a dowel in there in case somebody wants to put this in the bathroom or in the kitchen. You could hang a little decorative towel or something on this piece. So I took some wood glue, I shoved the dowel on through the little hole, and I also took some wood filler and went on the ends of the hole to kind of seal it in and let this dry as well. I was really going to just kind of fill both sides up with the wood filler, and I'm like, nah, we could kind of make a little, you know, make a little hand piece. I don't know. What would you guys have done? Would you have left it, or do you think that adding the dowel was a good idea? Anyhow, more of the black spray paint, okay? Black spray paint on, around, and everywhere. I just wanted this one to kind of have options. I'm using the same Hurricane Gray paint, and I'm only doing one coat of this, and not even a thick coat, like just a coat, because I'm coming back in with a whitewash over it, and then I'm going to just pull it back. All this is some water and some Waverly's plaster paint, chalk paint, and that's it. And I'm just wiping it back. Once this was dry, then it is time to bring on in our mix of joint compound and more plaster paint. I then took our stencil and laid it on down the long arm pieces at the bottom of our shelf, smoothed it on out, and then peeled it on back. And these just came out so beautiful. They added a little something something to the shelf, especially once we add our distressing. Now I need to create hangers on the back here so we can hang our shelf on the wall. So I'm using these little hammer tooth hangers. They're super easy to use. Just make sure that you try not to have them too crooked. I am definitely guilty of that. I'm then taking our sandpaper, once again wrapping it around our little block, and we are going to go ham all over this little gem and just sand it on out, creating a beautiful distressed look. One of my favorite ways to create something that really stands out is to just mix some paint colors on top of stencil. Oh, how I love to DIY me some tags. And this little joint, when I seen it at Dollar Tree, reminded me of a palette, but it's a fence. But I love palettes, so I picked that up and I'm like, let's make us a nice little wall planter with a stencil, okay? We gotta remove the home sign because it's in our way. Believe it or not, this came off really easy, and then I really thought it was funny because underneath the laser pop-out pieces they put on here, there's actually the word on here in silver. I see you, Dollar Tree. I see you. Now we're going to just remove our little, you know, the twine that is on the back of here. And at this point, I've had enough staples. So I'm just skipping all of that and just being lazy, cutting all of the ends and leaving that little tiny bit stuck in there with the twine. Like, just muck it. We're moving on. Here's the beautiful stencil we're going to be using today. It's an owl. I picked this up off Amazon. I'm not sure if it's down in my link or not for my affiliate store. And obviously, put your stencil wherever you want. I'm going to catty corner mine. I guess that's how you would describe it, because we're going to put planter piece down in the opposite section. I didn't want whatever flower or greenery I put in here to cover up the stencil. So pretty. We need to give this a nice base, so I'm just using some white chalk paint here, and I did 3 layers. It took 3 to get some nice coverage. You can obviously use the back. I know a lot of people do that. I've done that before just to save me this step, but I felt like I wanted to keep the back, and we're just going to paint the front. I'm going to use a paint stick to create that pocket look in our little planter piece here. We got to be able to have some room to shove some stuff down in there. So I'm just measuring this to size, and then we're going to need to bring in our miter shears. People, I do want to emphasize this is not the easiest way to cut a paint stick. If you have hand grip strength issues, I recommend using a miter box with the saw. Okay, I was being super lazy and decided to just gently press down on the sections, and then I flipped the paint stick back and forth, pressing down in the same section, so I was able to easily break it. And I wanted to keep the piece neutral. I almost didn't paint these at all, but decided against that and took a little bit of Waverly's Antique Wax and went over all the little pieces. For the stencil part, I wanted to keep it really colorful, so I grabbed a bunch of different colors along with some brown and some black, because I want the little piece that we just stained to blend into the stencil. I highly recommend, whenever you're going to do a large piece like this, especially if you're going to be working on top of the stencil for any length of time, tape that sucker down. Grab you some painter's tape and put a couple pieces on there just to hold your stencil in place. I'm going to be using a round brush mostly, but I will be alternating with a stippling brush for different effects. A soft round brush is going to give you a very faded light appearance with your paints, and a stippling brush will help give you heavier highlights. And it is important that whenever you're stenciling to remember the main trick to getting a good stencil without having a lot of bleed through is really your onloading and offloading of the brush. You want to make sure that it is almost a dry brush and it doesn't have a lot of paint on it. This is also going to help for the transition from color to color if you're using different colors. If you're just using one color, I wouldn't stress it too much. And in case anyone is interested, it took me about an hour to paint this entire stencil. I let that dry and then took a dotting tool and used a couple different colors to go around where I painted in areas and add some highlights, and then put a couple little dots going down in different sizes. I added a little bit of depth to the nose. And obviously, people, if you don't want to add any of this, don't. If you want to just paint your stencil all one color, just paint it all one color. This is just something I really like to do with stenciling, because you can take something, if you have a hard time drawing, and create an entire piece gently going over the stencil with light paint colors, and it looks like you hand drew it or you hand colored it, depending on the care and time that you take applying all of your colors, along with any additional little enhancements with a dotting tool. This turned out super pretty. I do wish I put a couple more highlights in certain areas, but for the most part, I love this. I let the stencil dry, and then I put our pieces on where I wanted them to go and just kind of mark the spaces. So this way I could come back in with the hot glue and then easily just kind of trace over the sections with the hot glue that I put our little marks, and then attach our pieces. And people, I do want to stress, okay, this is hot glue. This is not E6000 and Gorilla Glue gel. If you want this to last for a good long time, make sure you're incorporating some of that, or even some wood glue, so that way if you want to hang this on the door and the sun hits it, that hot glue is not going to just melt off and your DIY piece isn't going to just fall apart. I felt like the section we were going to put a hanger needed a little something, so I picked up some rings from Dollar Tree, little wooden rings, I guess that's what you want to call them. I decided to kind of stain one up with some antique Waverly wax and attach that right over the hole before I placed our hanger. And sometimes one of the funnest things to do is to build your own piece and let the stencil bring the whole piece to life. If you have scrap wood, grab whatever size would be perfect for this idea that we're about to create. I headed on over to the pre-cut section in Home Depot and grabbed one of these 1x6x4 pieces for just $6.65. Truth be told, my friends, I did not measure this. I just kind of put it in my miter saw and clamped it down, and then cut what size I thought would be perfect for this wall planter. I am just going to keep this nice and rustic and use some antique Waverly wax. I'm going to apply this with a baby wipe, and I'm going to apply it all over the entire piece of wood. Especially if you're going to be selling pieces like this, it's a good thing to make sure you're also doing the back. Somebody's going to peek behind there, so just make sure you get that side done as well. These are some cleaned out Campbell soup cans. We're going to give these a nice coat of paint, and then we're going to attach them to our large piece of wood. Keep in mind, whenever you're painting on different materials, you always want to check the paint that you're going to use and make sure it's going to adhere to that surface. I'm using DIY's clay base here. A good multi-surface or chalk paint also works good with this material. I ended up leaving some of the metal shining through, so these were a little rustic. I want to use Dollar Tree's metal lace to attach these. I started off by measuring out the lace, wrapping it around the can, so I made sure to give myself enough excess to attach it onto our piece of wood. Now you could do that 2 times, but I decided to just lay the piece I already cut down and measure another piece out and cut it. Now it's time for us to bring in the stapler. I want to make sure that our lace stays on our piece of wood, and this stapler is going to ensure that that happens. Really? Really? Got to be kidding me every single time. At some point, I'm gonna learn my lesson and check that stapler before I start stapling. The problem is I always feel like I put a ton in there to start with, and I got, several videos before I gotta worry about it. However, that never seems to work out. Now you're probably wondering, Brandy, how the hell are you gonna staple underneath that can? Well, this is just the trick. I am going to leave just enough space for that can to shimmy itself inside of the metal lace. So I see how I'm like kind of, you gotta mess with it, okay? Because if you cut it too big, it's gonna slide right on through. That probably came out wrong. I mean, get your metal lace on there however you need to get it on there. This worked out for me. I stapled one side, measured, stapled the other side, and then we are just shimmying our little can right on down. There were some smudges in the paint, no big deal. I just took the little sponge brush that I was using, went right over the little sections, and nobody's gonna know but me. You can leave your piece plain. I love using women in my art. I think they're absolutely beautiful and can just add something to anything you're DIYing. So we're gonna take this stencil that I have and use a little bit of Tim Holtz Distress Texture Paste, and we're going to put a thin layer over this. And then I'm gonna also take some sections of this and pop around in different areas on our board just to enhance the whole piece. Keep in mind, if you don't have any fancy schmancy tools to spread out your texture paste, it's no big deal. I have used a plastic spoon before. Use what you have on hand, just make sure it's a nice flat piece. You could even use a popsicle stick. Also ensuring that your piece is taped down to whatever you're applying this on will stop from bleed through underneath your stencil. I personally recommend waiting at least 24 hours before sealing over this piece. And a great idea would be to seal it with some Rust-Oleum Clear Matte spray paint. This way you can just kind of spray it over your metal lace and the cans, kind of get a nice seal on everything, especially if you plan on reselling this piece. And then once it's all dry, pop in your florals. If you want to put some real florals in here, just take a drill gun and screw in some holes in the bottom of your cans. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed these creative ways to use stencils, and until next time, bye!